Rain pelted the streets of the city that evening, washing away the last traces of daylight and leaving the world drenched in a gray, reflective glow. Inside a modest apartment on the 5th floor of a worn brick building, James sat hunched over his small kitchen table. His hands were rough, calloused from years of work, but they trembled slightly as he sifted through a pile of bills. The envelope at the top was particularly cruel, an eviction notice. He was a single dad, juggling 2 jobs, trying desperately to provide a life for his daughter Emma, and still, somehow, the world seemed determined to knock him down at every turn. Emma, 8 years old with wide brown eyes that mirrored her father's worries, curled up beside him on the threadbare sofa, clutching her favorite stuffed bear. "Dad," she whispered, "are we going to be okay?" James forced a smile. One of those thin, shaky smiles that barely masked the fear underneath. "We'll figure it out, kiddo. We always do." But inside, he felt the weight of helplessness pressing against his chest, heavier than anything he'd ever known. For James, life had always been a series of compromises. A few years ago, he had been laid off from a promising job in finance, and the world had shifted under his feet. Since then, he had poured himself into odd jobs, long hours at construction sites, deliveries that left him sore and exhausted. Every night, he returned home to the same small apartment, greeted by Emma's smile, the only warmth in a world that often seemed cold and indifferent. Meanwhile, in the skyscraper of glass and steel downtown, Victoria Hale, a woman the media hailed as the unstoppable CEO of Hale Industries, sat alone in her corner office, surrounded by leather-bound books, polished awards, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. She should have felt satisfaction, even triumph. But she didn't. Victoria had it all, or so the world thought. Wealth, power, influence, even a fiancé who adored her. Yet the truth was far more complicated. Her engagement, which had been the pinnacle of her life just weeks ago, now felt hollow. Every carefully staged smile she had practiced in front of cameras, every social media post portraying bliss, had been a lie. Her heart wasn't in it. Every time she looked at him, she realized she couldn't pretend to love someone just because society, her family, and her company expected it. That night, as the city lights flickered below, Victoria made a decision that would shock everyone. She canceled the wedding, not quietly, not with excuses that would save face, but boldly, with honesty that left nothing to misinterpret. She was free, but more importantly, she was finally honest with herself. Meanwhile, James was barely keeping his world together. Emma had been sick earlier that week, and he'd had to choose between taking her to the doctor and covering the rent. He chose his daughter, of course, but now he was at the breaking point. As he sat with the eviction notice, he felt a familiar tightening in his chest, the fear of failure, of being unable to protect the one person who depended on him most. The knock on the door startled him. He glanced at the clock. 9:47 p.m. Visitors at this hour were unusual. He opened the door cautiously, and there she stood, Victoria Hale, in a rain-dampened coat, her usually impeccable appearance slightly disheveled, looking at him with an intensity that made him step back in surprise. "James," her voice trembled slightly, a mixture of determination and vulnerability. He blinked. "Do I know you?" "You do now," she said softly. I need your help. Can I come in?" Something about her tone, so raw, so sincere, made James step aside. He led her into the small apartment, where Emma peeked out from behind the sofa, curious and cautious. Victoria knelt slightly, smiling warmly at the little girl. "Hi, Emma, I'm Victoria. I know this is sudden, but I promise I mean no harm." James closed the door behind her, still unsure how to process the surreal turn of events. "I am sorry. I don't understand. Why are you here?" Victoria took a deep breath, her eyes glistening. "Because I need to be honest. For the first time in my life, I need to do the right thing, not for my image, not for anyone else, but for myself. And I realized, I can't do that without telling you the truth." For the next hour, Victoria explained everything: her engagement, the wedding, her realization that she couldn't force herself to love someone, the suffocating expectations of her corporate world. James listened in stunned silence. There was no trace of arrogance in her voice, no hint of the CEO who commanded entire industries. She was human, fallible, searching for authenticity in a world that rewarded masks over truth. When she finally paused, James felt an unfamiliar tug at his chest, a mixture of sympathy, awe, and confusion. Why come to me?" he asked. Victoria's eyes locked onto his. "Because I know what it's like to feel trapped by life. And because I've seen you. I've seen how hard you fight for your daughter, how much love you put into every single day despite the challenges. I needed to meet someone who reminds me that life isn't about wealth or status, it's about heart. And right now, you have more heart than anyone I've ever met." James was speechless. The words struck him like a thunderclap. No one, no boss, no colleague, no friend, had ever seen him like that. He felt exposed, but in the safest possible way. As though this stranger had pulled back a veil and allowed him to breathe. Victoria didn't stop there. She opened her laptop, swiped through spreadsheets, business plans, and investment portfolios. "I want to help you," she said. "I want to invest in your dream. I want to give you the opportunity to provide for Emma without fear, without worry, without constantly fighting for scraps. But you have to promise me something. You have to promise that you'll continue fighting. Continue living with honesty and integrity, no matter how hard it gets. James could hardly believe it. For years, he had dreamed of a way out of the constant struggle, a chance to live without the oppressive weight of financial insecurity. And here, at his doorstep, was someone offering him that opportunity not as charity, but as recognition of his character, his resilience, his unwavering dedication to his daughter. Over the next few weeks, James's life began to transform. With Victoria's support, he started a small business delivering sustainable home goods, a venture that combined his passion for work with a purpose-driven mission. Emma thrived in the new stability, her laughter echoing through the apartment, replacing the anxious silence that had once dominated their evenings. But the transformation wasn't just financial. James learned to trust himself again, to believe in his ability to create a better life. And Victoria, watching him navigate life with courage and compassion, discovered a sense of fulfillment she had never known. For the first time, she felt that power wasn't measured by wealth or status, it was measured by the impact you had on the lives of others, by the kindness and integrity you carried into every interaction. Their connection grew slowly. They weren't rushing into anything, but there was a deep mutual respect, an unspoken understanding that life had brought them together at exactly the right moment. Emma adored Victoria, and Victoria found herself looking forward to the small, chaotic joys of their daily life: home-cooked meals, homework sessions, evening walks through the park. One rainy evening, similar to the one that had brought them together, Victoria and James sat on the couch, watching Emma play with her toys. She turned to him, her eyes bright. "James, I want to thank you," she said softly, "for showing me what matters, for reminding me that honesty and courage are worth more than any title or ring. You've changed my life." James smiled, feeling a warmth that had little to do with the coffee they were sipping. "No, Victoria, you've changed mine. You reminded me that it's okay to ask for help, that it's okay to trust someone, that life doesn't have to be a constant battle to survive. Sometimes, it can be about thriving." Months passed, and their bond deepened. They faced challenges. Of course, business hiccups, unexpected expenses, societal gossip, but together, they discovered a rhythm, a partnership that was grounded in respect, kindness, and authenticity. Then came the day that cemented James's transformation. A former colleague, who had once mocked him for being a single dad struggling to get by, called him with an opportunity to expand the business into multiple cities. It was everything James had ever hoped for, but he knew he couldn't have done it alone. Victoria had believed in him when no one else would, and he knew this success was as much hers as it was his. That evening, as the city lights shimmered through their apartment window, James reflected on the journey. From the brink of despair to a place of hope, he had been lifted not just by financial opportunity, but by the human connection that had reminded him of the power of kindness, honesty, and resilience. And in that moment, he realized the greatest lesson of all. Life isn't about avoiding struggle, it's about embracing it with courage, and being willing to open your heart when the world seems determined to close every door. Victoria sat beside him, slipping her hand into his. "You've done it," she said softly. "You've built a life worth living, not just for yourself, but for Emma, for everyone who looks up to you." James squeezed her hand, a grin spreading across his face. "We did it," he said, "together." And in that small apartment, filled with laughter, warmth, and the quiet hum of a life rebuilt, they understood something profound. Kindness changes everything, not because it solves every problem immediately, but because it sparks hope, ignites courage, and reminds us that even in our